The earth.
I've seen people be sedated.
It makes you a zombie.
They'll restrain you,
Like in a way, both of your shoulders were touching.
pick you up, and put you into solitary confinement.
Just me in the cell by myself.
I felt completely violated.
I remember him sticking his hands directly in my pants.
I think that my son was neglected, abused, and had I not taken him out, he would have died.
Feces on the floor, blood on the walls, and concrete slabs with thin mattresses for beds.
The abuse was obviously widespread.
There were people making big money off of the suffering of these children.
It's a billion-dollar industry. I mean, so much money is being made off the abuse of these kids.
I really needed help. The perception is you're gonna get therapy, you'll be in a safe environment where you're monitored and we'll make sure that you're not a danger to yourself or other people.
I was sent to 13 short-term mental health facilities before I was put into a long-term mental health facility.
They just punished me. It probably made me even more suicidal.
We had to sit at the nurse's station for phone calls, which means the nurse is right within earshot.
The second you start to express how you're being treated, they have that option to cut the line.
The staff member just hung up the phone, screamed at me, told me, "You have your phone privileges taken away."
They said that I could not sleep in my own bed or go outside or have any privileges until I wrote an apology letter to my parents.
They would take myself and other girls into this room and they would perform medical exams. It wasn't even with a doctor, it was with a couple different staff members. They would have us lay on the table and put their fingers inside of us, and I don't know what they were doing, but it was definitely not a doctor, and it was really scary. And now looking back as an adult, that was definitely sexual abuse.
These men with these strong arms are grabbing your arms, people are grabbing your legs, people are grabbing every part of your body, and then the staff put their knee on my temple. And I just remember like my vision, like the blackness was like closing in. And you're like, oh my God, if I die, are they gonna like call my parents? Like, sorry, we know you sent your kid here to get help, but we accidentally killed them.
Last April, a child in Michigan, Cornelius Fredericks, threw a piece of bread and as a result was violently restrained by numerous staff and died.
There's video of this. Literally all he was doing was throwing bread. He was not a threat, but he's restrained for about 12 minutes. Cornelius died, and there are thousands of other kids that experience these restraints multiple times a week or witness these restraints multiple times a week, which is very traumatic. It is a management technique to manage kids in a very violent way.
How many more deaths do we need to decide that now is the time to act?
Families like ours, we need extra help. Brandon can fall at any time. He needs somebody with him every single second of the day. He can't be left alone. They said that, this hospital can deal with medically complex children. We have nursing care 24/7. I entered the hospital. I walk into my son's room. Brandon is seizing. There's no nurse in the room. There's gnats flying around him. He has a high temperature. He has bruises all over him. They knowingly and willingly took Brandon on as a patient, even though they actually couldn't provide the medical care that he needed 24/7. They did that for profit.
States and federal Medicaid dollars pay them to care for kids who often have nowhere else to go. Contracts obtained by NBC News show states pay between $275 and $800 a day per child.
I had a bonus plan on my first year there as CFO to where I had to meet a certain ratio of how many patients to employees, and it wasn't even close to meeting the minimum staffing ratio of the Utah regulation. The corporate involvement is so strong. There's constant pressure to cut costs. Almost every single decision is about profit. It doesn't feel to me that they're managed to provide great patient care.
So you have to have enough staffing to have an excellent program, but you can't have too much staffing to eat up your profit.
The survivors have been telling us what's wrong for a long time. They've been telling us what's needed.
These experiences of abuse are not just reserved to a few bad actors. It truly is institutional. It affects every state and every community.
You got the fancy mic.
I know, I'm like, I usually have this when I perform, but.
Thank you all so much for being here. We are so excited for this conversation, especially after a full day with so many presentations from many of you. This has been a day of learning, and this is going to be an incredible conversation on stage today. My name is Kelsey Noonan. I'm the director at Pivotal Ventures. Pivotal, it was founded by Melinda French Gates to advance social progress. We have a mandate of supporting the well-being of the next generation and supporting gender equality in the US and around the world by supporting women's leadership. And with that in mind, I am so honored and excited to be on stage with one of the most iconic leaders, female leaders, in the world, Paris Hilton.
Thank you.
Paris likely needs no introduction, but she is a celebrity businesswoman, activist, philanthropist, and multi-hyphenate artist and producer. We are so honored to have her voice and influence on stage today in support of protecting the well-being of young people. We're also joined on stage by Caroline Cole. Caroline is part of Paris's 1111 Impact team. She serves as the strategic advocacy lead, helping manage their public policy agenda, and co-hosts their podcast, Trapped in Treatment. So Paris, this audience likely knows your success story, your influence as an entrepreneur and in the media, but we're here to start with a very different conversation about a chapter in your life as a teenager when you were held and abused in a residential treatment center as a teen. Can you tell us what happened to you as a teenager?
Yes, so thank you for the introduction, and I'm so honored to be here today, and thank you all. This is never easy to talk about, but it all started when I moved to New York City. I had lived a very sheltered life in Los Angeles before, and then when I moved to New York, just at school, this was before I was diagnosed with ADHD. I was, as hard as I would study, I was just getting horrible grades, failing so many classes, and then I just started going out at night, sneaking out, the bad grades, so my parents hired these people called education consultants. And at this point, my parents had no idea, but these people get kickbacks and commissions for children that they send to these type of facilities. And my parents were shown all these brochures for these amazing, well, it looked amazing by the pictures of kids smiling and riding horses and going fishing, and it just looked like it's a beautiful boarding school. They had no idea, where I was being sent to. And then one night, these two men came into my room at 4:30 in the morning, and I had no idea who they were. And they said, "Do you want to go the easy way or the hard way?" And they were holding up handcuffs, and I was terrified. I thought I was being kidnapped, just so horrified. And these people are called transporters, and this is the way that children are brought into these places. And something that I've had severe nightmares about since I was a teenager. And then when I arrived, I thought I was going into a school at this point, because they told me this, the people who were traveling with me there. And as soon as I walked in, I knew that this wasn't a normal school. They immediately told me to strip search and take off my clothes. I was just a kid. There was men in the room as well. It was humiliating and just terrifying. And then from there, they took away everything, took away my name. They gave me a new name, which was my number, 127. And from there, it was just severe emotional, psychological, physical abuse. Sometimes late at night, they would take girls into a room and do gynecological exams with people who are not even doctors. They were sexually abusing the girls there. We couldn't tell our parents We were cut off from the outside world. And when they allowed me to speak to my parents, when I tried to say something negative, they immediately just hung up the phone and took away my phone privileges for months and months, and would put me in a solitary confinement, just a small room with scratches all over the walls, blood, just a drain, no windows. It was just very cold. They would take away our clothes, and we would just be freezing and in hysterics, crying in there. It was so scary. And then I had no education. They wouldn't let us go to school, and they would just have the kids literally sit on a chair and just stare at a wall, and you would have to have perfect posture, and if you even slouched or complained for 1 second, they would immediately make you do it all over again. And this was every single day, and constantly girls around me being restrained, strangled. It was just like something out of a horror film. And I was not a bad kid. I did not deserve to be there. No child deserves to go through what I went through, and so many others. And it was a living nightmare. Like, it was something that was so traumatizing that when I got out of there, I promised myself, I'm never gonna talk about this again. They really instilled that shame in me, where I was so just in so much pain and hurting so much that what they had done to me, that I just didn't want to even think about it or tell anyone. And they would say that to us, like, no one is ever going to believe you. And I think that's why so many survivors of these places don't say anything, because they're just so ashamed of what they went through. But now, being an adult, I realize that I'm the one who should never have been ashamed. It should be the people who work at these places and the people who are funding these places. And I also didn't tell anyone because I didn't think other people were going through these things, because it just seemed like something out of a really horrible movie. It just didn't seem even real that there could be people like this. But then when I was doing my documentary, the director, I told her about a nightmare one night, but I said, don't put this in my documentary. I don't want this to be part of my story. And she said, well, I've done research, and now there is thousands of these schools, and hundreds of thousands of children are being sent into these places. And when she showed me, that's when I knew that I needed to use my voice and say something, because just all these children are living a living nightmare, and I know from lived experience of what they're going through, and it's still happening today, and it's boomed into a $23 billion a year industry where taxpayers' money is going to the abuse of children. And it's just been very healing, though, to tell my story, though, as well. But it's been difficult just to go back and just remember all of that.
Thank you for sharing. And I want to talk a little bit more about the groundswell of stories that you have come out since you shared your story. But I'm so sorry that you lived through that experience, and that instead of receiving mental health care, you were placed in a predatory treatment center while you were still a child. And I think that that's important to keep in mind here. We're talking about minors. Caroline?
And also one thing, how they just manipulate and lie to the families, because I feel that there's so many parents where they're worried about their child, they want to send them somewhere, and the fact that these places just have such deceptive marketing and lie to these families, and it's really horrible how these places are run, and there just needs to be more transparency.
And then we'll talk about your work in ensuring some of that oversight, because families are certainly part of the dialogue here, and I think many caregivers feeling out of options and confused about what these treatment centers are. Caroline, can you share about your experience? How similar was that to what Paris just shared?
Very, very similar. So I was also sent to a behavior modification boarding school when I was 14 years old. And at the time, my mom and I were having some issues. I was an only child. We had always been best friends my whole life, side by side, everything we did, playing music in the car, dancing together. And so once I started to enter my teen years, I was like, okay, Mom, get out of my room. And I wanted to, listen to my music and lock the door. And so she started feeling this shift in our relationship, and I think it really scared her. And so she found this boarding school that had promised her all the right things. They said, we are a family reunification program. We are designed to build character and leadership. And when I got there, I was actually excited to go. I'll mention that. I was excited. I thought, this is going to be great. It's going to be like college. I'm going to have a roommate. And we're going to stay up and talk about boys and, paint our nails and stuff like that.
Which is a very teenage experience.
Right. Yes. I was very hopeful. And then, quickly I had realized that it was not at all that kind of experience. And they strip searched me the moment that I got there, made me do jumping jacks naked, squat and cough. I slept on a very thin mat out in the hallway under fluorescent lights. As Paris explained too, they took all of my belongings. I wasn't allowed to have any kind of personal items. And really the whole time that I was there for 2.5 years. We weren't allowed to talk. I couldn't even say thank you or excuse me. Complete silence 24 hours a day. We weren't allowed to make eye contact with each other, facial expressions. We couldn't look out the window. It took me 12 months to earn a phone call with my mom. And you can't come out of an experience like that the same person as you went in. And so really, at the core of our work at 1111 Media Impact, we want to create environments where kids can heal and where they can find themselves and enter into adolescence and adulthood with the tools and skills that they need to be successful in whatever it is that they want to do. And instead of these treatment environments where kids need treatment from their treatment, right? They're coming out traumatized because of what was supposed to help them. And a lot of times what the unfortunate result is that kids never want to see a therapist again. They never want to go get treatment anywhere else again because it was so horrific the first time. And I'm sure you can imagine that leads to some very, very tragic cases in our community of survivors.
Thank you for sharing. And that distrust in medical professionals and in therapy then has such a long-lasting effect on young people's lives. Paris, you mentioned the outpouring of stories from other young people once you came forward with your documentary and your story. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're hearing from young people today?
It's just been incredible just how many people have reached out to me. I've received thousands of letters from around the world, from children who have been through it, people who have been through it many years ago, from parents and family members, and people just saying, thank you so much for telling your story. No one ever believed me. My parents didn't believe me, but then I showed them your documentary, and now they finally believe me. And parents saying, thank you so much. You've healed our family, because we just, when your children are at some place and they're supposed to be with professional people that are helping them, you're gonna believe what these people are saying. You would never think they're lying to you as a parent. So just to be able to validate so many people for their experience and what they went through, and so many parents also reaching out and saying, thank you so much. I was worried about my child, and because of what I read about what you went through, I didn't send my child there. And a lot of these schools are being shut down now because of this, and there's finally accountability, and there needs to be much more, but it's just been the most healing experience of my life, just to hear from so many others and to really turn my pain into a purpose. And I really believe that maybe God made me go through this and gave me a special gift so that one day I could be the hero that I needed when I was a little girl.
The way that you've used your voice on this topic is so significant, especially for the many young people who maybe don't have any other adults who sees them and is championing them. So on behalf of all of those kids, thank you.
Thank you.
We've talked a little bit about schools, and you've mentioned both of your experiences. What is the state of residential treatment centers like the schools you both experienced today?
Oh, sorry, was that to me or?
Sure.
Sorry, okay, apologies. So I'll jump in, yes. So this issue has actually grown tremendously, and we were really shocked to find out that these facilities now, and I just want to kind of give a definition of what we're talking about here. So they range everywhere from wilderness programs, boot camps, ranches, to boarding schools, residential treatment centers, even psychiatric residential treatment facilities. So they kind of run this gamut of different facility types. But what we've noticed is that they have become somewhat of a catch-all for these kids that we don't know what to do with, right? So it's kids coming through the child welfare system, it's kids coming through juvenile justice. Sometimes these facilities are being used as somewhat of diversion programs, which actually I don't know if they're better than a detention center, to be quite frank. We also have kids through special education, and their IEP plans are paying for them to go to these facilities where many times they are also not receiving education at those facilities either. And of course, there's still parents who are privately placing their kids in these types of centers because they're sold a good deal. It sounds great. Family reunification, okay. You know, you're desperate and someone else says that they're experts and they're gonna take care of it, fantastic. But unfortunately, we have seen a number of really horrific preventable deaths. The abuse continues. We have people who reach out to us very regularly and tell us, you know, horrifying stories. There was a young boy, I'll tell one very quickly, but there was a young boy who was at a facility on the East Coast, and he was only 12 years old, and he died at that facility in less than 24 hours. And they had placed him in something called a bivy bag, which, if you're not aware of what that is, because I wasn't, it's like a single person sleeping bag / tent. But it's almost like it's very tight around you so you cannot move. And they had placed him in this bivy bag that had an alarm on the outside if he tried to get out of it. And the next morning, they discovered that he was non-responsive. And I just want you to imagine the incredible pain that his family must have felt. You know, they ultimately made this decision to put him in a facility thinking that they would get the help that they needed as a family, and within 24 hours, this just happened last year. This is still happening today.
And with Cornelius Fredericks, he was 16, and this happened last year, and he was in the cafeteria, and all he did was just throw a sandwich, and then 7 staff members restrained him and were on top of him, and then he was pronounced dead just for throwing a sandwich. And these places are just so unsafe, and it really attracts predators and people who want to be in a position of power of vulnerable children who are not believed in the first place because they're called troubled children, troubled teens. So it's just really creates an environment where people can get away with a lot, and where they have been doing this for decades and decades. And yeah, this industry has just ballooned up because people realize how much profit that they can make when they're hardly spending anything. The staff is undertrained, underqualified. They don't have to have any education, especially with the wilderness programs. I had to experience that for 4 months of just literally being out in the wilderness in the snow. And that's another thing that they just can make so much profit off as well. yeah, it's really has just turned into an entire industry, and even out in Jamaica and Samoa and Mexico, they're going all around the world now and building these schools.
Offshoring
I hate calling it a school.
Yeah. And that's really hard to reconcile with what you both have described. You've talked about deaths at these facilities. You've talked about sexual abuse, predatory behavior. At the same time, Paris, what you were just saying, this is big business. You said up front that this is a $23 billion industry annually just in public funding. That doesn't include private funding. How did we get here? How do we get to a place where that much public funding is going to these treatment centers? Caroline?
Yeah, so it's interesting when you look at the history. You can really kind of pinpoint when these facilities started to kind of grab hold in our culture and society. And so, of course, I'm sure most people in here are familiar with the deinstitutionalization movement and moving away from asylums. And in the early 60s, there was the Community Mental Health Act that was passed into law. However, the goal at that time was to create 1,500 new community mental health centers. And unfortunately, that was never fulfilled, right? And so I know I'm so preaching to the choir here, but we just don't have the resources that we need to reach kids before they reach a state of crisis, where a family might then start considering looking into a more residential type facility. And so we really are so desperate for that infrastructure. And so, I think what will also be important for us going forward in the future is to really arm families with the tools and knowledge of how to navigate these systems, right? And so it's easy for these companies to capitalize on a parent's natural love and desire to do absolutely anything for their child to keep them safe and protected. And so if they step in and they say, we've got all the answers, we're gonna fix this for you, most parents are saying, where do I sign?
Mm-hmm. What's alarming is that there's many folks in this audience who have community-based solutions that have worked really hard to get Medicaid funding and other public funding, and yet there's a significant amount of Medicaid funding that is going to these facilities. What does that look like from a Medicaid overlap?
Yes, so Medicaid is one of the main sources of revenue for these treatment providers, and there's one organization called Universal Health Services. They have hundreds of facilities across the nation. 39% of their revenue comes from Medicaid. There's also another provider known as Acadia that has had just a trail of horror stories following them wherever they go. 51% of their revenue is from Medicaid. And so, it is so extremely important that we look for waste, fraud, and abuse that's taking place in these facilities. There's a lot of kids that don't really need that acute level of care, right? And these companies know that they can max out insurance. Right? Oh, yep. No, they need to be here. They're still showing, symptoms of, the issue of why they were admitted, and so they know that they are going to max out that insurance benefit, and they know exactly how long it takes to do that.
When you talk about 50% coming from Medicaid funding, that's not a rounding error. That is a very deliberate choice, and there certainly needs to be more oversight of where those dollars are going. I think it's also part of a larger trend where a lot of funds earmarked for mental health support are going to more punitive interventions for young people. Right now, there are 10 million kids. That's about 25% of all teens and tweens that go to school that has a police officer presence and no mental health support on site. That means that kids are going to be disproportionately punished or systems affected when they are experiencing mental health distress, and of course that affects kids of color at higher rates. So instead of these predatory systems and these privatized systems, what should public funding and Medicaid dollars be going to?
I think it should be going to community-based services, so it can prevent this from children even having to go to one of these places. And it's really about giving those, it cost 10 times more to be sending them to one of these places rather than doing something that's based at home. I think that kids should be with their families and if it's not with their families, it'd be with another family member or someone else that they could trust rather than just being sent away to these places for profit. And really just building just different communities and resources for them to feel supported so that that won't even happen to happen to them in the first place.
Thank you for sharing. And we share that mandate at Pivotal Ventures as well, as really focused on community support systems upstream before a kid is ever in distress. And that includes school-based care and community-based care, which is just so vitally important. I want to talk a little bit about some hopeful elements here. Paris, you've lent your voice to this issue, your advocacy, your philanthropy. What have some of the successes been from your team in the last few years in really driving change?
Just the impact has been incredible. We've helped change 10 state laws to protect children.
Those of you who work with state systems know just how hard that is to change state laws, so 10 is amazing.
So we've introduced the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act, and we are pushing it for federal legislation. And we have over 200 sponsors, and we've made it bipartisan, and just been going back and forth to DC and going to the Capitol and speaking with senators and legislators and making people aware of this, because a lot of people, they have no idea that this is happening. I also just testified in Congress, and we are hoping we're going to push this legislation very soon. Sorry, I have some notes because I've done a lot of things. And what? Sorry. My documentary has now been seen by over 80 million people, and my advocacy work has garnered more than 87 billion of earned media impressions. And I just traveled to Jamaica to work with the US and Jamaican governments because there was 8 boys that I found out that were in one of these facilities, and they were being locked in dog cages, they were being burned, they were being starved, they were being waterboarded, they were just basically being tortured. And these were 8 adopted orphans that their families didn't want them anymore, so they literally just sent them away to be in Jamaica and be forgotten there. And when I heard that, my team and I, we immediately got on a plane and flew to Jamaica to go support them and at their trial. And it was just so heartbreaking to see them. The look in their eyes just reminded me of how I felt and how so many of the kids around me looked. That look of just total, just having everything taken from you and just being beaten to where you just don't even feel like a human anymore. And we've now got those boys placements back in the US, and I saw one of them recently, and just to see the smile on his face, it was just like a completely different person. Just to see the impact of really doing something like that and seeing what a difference it can make in a child's life, that is something that just makes me want to continue working even harder for this, and I will not stop working until change is made. And I really believe that this is my true purpose in life, and I'm just extremely proud of everything else. And we're also filming a documentary on all of that right now, just to raise more awareness. And I just wrote a song with Sia called ADHD, and I just released the music video a few weeks ago because October was ADHD Awareness Month, and that was really just amazing and empowering for the ADHD community.
It is so powerful to hear the way that you've shown up for these kids who really don't have other advocates, and allowing them to be children again and hear those positive stories of arriving back home. That's phenomenal. Caroline, what else is on your agenda for your advocacy efforts with 1111?
Yes, so our big goal is to pass a law in all 50 states. And so that is quite an ambitious goal, but we're a fifth of the way there. So I think we can do this. And we are also wanting to really change the narrative around youth mental health. Again, you know, so many of these kids have been labeled as bad kids, difficult kids, complex kids. And so we are wanting to create a culture of understanding, right? And we were having a conversation before this, how can we be liaisons for these adolescents into adulthood? And Paris has already done such a phenomenal job with starting that conversation with the work that you've done around ADHD and neurodiversity. And similar to Paris, I was diagnosed with ADHD as an adult, and it actually wasn't until, my son was diagnosed that I started reading, and I was like, wait, I do that. I'm like, that sounds like me. So those are the big things on the horizon for us. We really want to put a focus on continuing to tell stories that matter. And I just want to emphasize, I know Paris just told everyone about, you know, our list of accomplishments, but some of the greater accomplishments I think are a little bit more nuanced. And so when you had released your documentary, This is Paris, back in 2020, no one had heard of this issue yet. There was no one had heard of the troubled teen industry, have heard of the systemic abuse that's happening in youth residential treatment facilities. And even when we first introduced our bill in Congress, hundreds of conversations with elected officials, and we're like, have you heard of this issue? And they're like, no, we have not. And then we're having to, you know, do all of this educating. And now that's just not the conversation that we have today. People have heard of this now. They know about it. And that has also created a lot of interest in other platforms creating things like documentaries. There's several on Netflix. Hell Camp, The Program, which is actually about the facility that I went to, if anyone's seen that. And I believe Amazon Prime has several documentaries about it. And really, Paris was the spark that made that possible. And so that's really the shift that we're wanting to create in so many other areas as well. And so there's a lot of exciting things on the horizon. And one last thing I will add is that we are really, really excited about creating meaningful partnerships with folks who are doing things well. And I have been so inspired to be here at this event with everyone and hear about the exciting work that's happening. And so that's really where we are at now, is building capacity and creating partnerships. So thank you.
I'm so glad you talked about that narrative shift, because I think it is so important to think about how we talk about teenagers, the experience of being a teen, and as Paris said earlier, to be the kind of adults that can show up for the teens that we were, and to really think about the opportunity and how to shape their trajectory into adulthood rather than seeing this from a punitive lens. In order to do that, it will take all of us. We've talked about the advocacy efforts that you all have undertaken and the fact that we need more oversight, more regulatory endeavors to control this industry. But that's not all that it will take to really transform the system of care for young people. And there are many people in this room that need to be called into action on that. One of the things I've so admired about your work, Paris, is that you've centered the lived experiences and the voices of young people. As you look to the audience today, what advice would you give to behavioral health organizations or investors about really centering the lived experience of young people, particularly those that have been harmed by some of the systems that exist?
Yeah, I think it's so important to let people speak who have actually experienced these things, because when people who are talking about things who maybe never experienced it, they don't really know what it's like. And that's why it's always really important when we go to DC, we bring other survivors with us, just to show, just not only did it happen back then, it's still happening today, and to show also people that they can use their voice and you can make a difference. I think that's important for kids to also grow up and know that if you do the right thing and you really want to make change, you have the power to do it. You don't have to be like working in the government. You could just be a person who has something that they don't think is right in the world, and they can actually make it. Like, I never thought I would be changing laws. Like, it's been really incredible, just the power of telling the truth and using your voice to make a difference for others.
Can I add to that? Thank you.
And Caroline, over to you.
I just wanted to add something to what Paris said. So, Paris, I don't know if you remember when we were working on our first bill in Utah, and we had gone to testify in the committee hearing, and Paris told her story, and I mean, everyone's crying. It was so emotional. I had a chance to tell my story, and we also had another survivor join us. And I remember there was a senator who looked at us. Everyone was very moved, and that was so incredible for us. But there was one senator in particular who looked at us, and he said, "I am so sorry that we failed you. I am so sorry." And I still choke up thinking
I'll never
about.
forget that.
Yeah, it healed something in that moment to finally have someone take accountability for what happened, to be responsible, and then just to receive that apology. And so I knew in that moment that we had to make that experience possible to everyone who had been affected by this industry. Everyone deserves that moment of validation and of healing. And we really believe at 1111 Media Impact that when you have the ability to change the very systems that have harmed you, that is healing. That is healing. And we really can change the world with that sentiment. And so we take our lived experience advocacy very seriously. Every DC trip, we have about 100 to 150 advocates who join us. And we work with them to train them how to tell their story, how to talk to elected officials. We talk about the legislative process. And we really help be that bridge for them to receive the justice that they deserve. And so that has been one of the most life-changing experiences for me, Paris, and so thank you for all of the work that you've done to make that possible for our whole community of survivors.
Thank you.
Caroline, staying with you, I'm glad that you talked about that issue of accountability for the health plans, the payers, the insurance companies that may be here today. What role can they play in taking action to reform the system?
Yes, so I think first and foremost, I think it's very important for payers to investigate the fraud, waste, and abuse that we've talked about. That is extremely prevalent. Many of these facilities are charging upwards of $10,000 to $12,000 to $15,000 per month per child. Okay, in Washington, we saw that the special education system was spending $500,000 a year, $500,000 a year per child to warehouse them in a facility where they're receiving subpar treatment and, at best, and then being abused or possibly even dying at worst. So I think there needs to be some accountability there with that kind of spending. But the other thing is, and I really noticed this being here at this conference, is there's so many of you who have these really remarkable ideas, and you're putting them into tangible form in the form of services and apps. And but I also heard the sentiment that it has been very difficult to receive any kind of, and I'm not totally an insurance expert, but to receive any kind of support from insurance companies, or to receive that coverage for your clients or your patients who are wanting to engage with the services that you provide. So I think we need to expedite that process, right? This should not take years. These services are so dire and critical, and truly lives are on the line. So while we're waiting to shuffle through that paperwork for a year or 2 years, or however long it takes, that's just not okay. We need to make this process faster.
Wholeheartedly agree with that. Our founder, Melinda French Gates, describes herself as an impatient optimist, believing that there is a positive arc for change, but that we all need to take action to really accelerate that pace of change. And the work that your team is doing is such a perfect example of that. I also love the example you shared from Utah of how powerful it is as you've shared your own vulnerability, your own experiences, what that's unlocked for other people, both in residential treatment centers, but beyond in talking about their mental health and really opening this dialogue. It has sparked a conversation that's national and just now continuing. Is there anything else you would like to share with the audience before we close?
Thank you so much, and sorry, I'm very shy. And with my ADHD, I have like a million thoughts going through my mind at once. So I was trying to put it all into words today. But thank you all for listening, and I think it's just so important to just continue raising awareness. So hopefully you guys can take this into your lives and help others through telling your stories as well. And I'm just so proud of 1111 Media Impact and my team and everything we're doing, and I'm so grateful to be up here on stage with you, and thank you for being so kind, and I love you, sis. Thank you so much. I couldn't do this without you and Rebecca.
Yes.
And I love you all.
Paris, thank you so much for your leadership, your voice, and your vulnerability on this topic. Caroline, thank you for joining us on stage. I'm so excited for what's next, and please join the movement, and it will take all of us to make change. Thank you.
Thank you.